My father said, "If you won't help your brother, you're not family." So I left and let them deal with their own bills. The first time I realized grief could be used like a weapon, I was 20 years old and standing in our rented kitchen with my work shoes still on, smelling like hot oil and metal dust, staring at a shut-off notice taped to the fridge like it had been placed there by someone who hated us personally. My name is Tamsin. I live in the United States, in one of those small industrial towns where the air always has a faint taste of something burnt, and everyone knows everyone's business even if they pretend they do not. Back then, our whole world was a cramped rental house with cheap carpet and a front porch that sagged in the middle. My mother had died a few months earlier in an accident so sudden it made the rest of life feel unreal, like I was watching it through the wrong prescription glasses. People told us the usual things. She is in a better place. She would not want you to worry. Time will heal. I nodded at all of it because what else do you do when you are too shocked to argue? My father took it the hardest, at least on paper. He stayed in bed until noon, then sat in the living room staring at the dark television like it might turn on by itself and show him a new life. Anytime someone suggested counseling, he got offended in this quiet, righteous way. "I'm not crazy," he'd say, like therapy was a punishment for bad people. "Your mother wouldn't want strangers in our business." My brother was 4 years older than me, and somehow managed to turn the entire tragedy into a personal vacation. He quit his part-time job within a week because, according to him, it felt wrong to work while we were grieving. Then he spent his days gaming, eating cereal out of the box, and going out with friends to clear his head. He would come home at midnight smelling like cheap cologne and energy drinks, toss his jacket on the couch, and ask me what was for dinner. I was the one who stopped going to community college because the deposit alone started to look like a joke. I picked up a factory job assembling electronic components on a line that moved too fast for breathing, let alone feelings. I started waking up before sunrise, catching the bus at an hour that made the streetlights look lonely, and coming home with my hands aching from tiny, repetitive motions. The money was not great, but it was steady. I told myself that was enough. Rent, groceries, utilities, and whatever new surprise bill arrived like a slap. I started handing my paycheck to my father in cash because he insisted it would be humiliating for the landlord to see the daughter paying. I did not understand why he was not humiliated by the part where he was not paying, but okay. At first, I blamed the chaos on the shock. I kept telling myself it was temporary. Grief makes people weird. People need time. Family sticks together. All those phrases, like little bandages I kept slapping onto a wound that was still bleeding. Then that shut-off notice showed up. I asked my father where the money went. He blinked at me like I had asked him to explain the moon. "I needed something to take the edge off," he said, and his voice got sharp as if the idea of him needing comfort was the only fact that mattered. My brother, sitting at the table with his headphones around his neck, laughed. "You're the responsible one," he said. "You're built for that. It's like your role." I remember how my stomach dropped, not from fear of the lights going out, but from the casual way he said it. Like the future had already been decided and I just had not read the memo. I paid the electric bill. I went to work the next morning. I came home and cooked pasta. I cleaned up my brother's messes. I listened to my father sigh dramatically in the living room, like he was the one keeping us afloat. And somewhere in the middle of that first year, I opened a separate account with a small local credit union and started dropping little amounts into it whenever I could. $10 here, 15 there. Not enough to change anything, but enough to let me pretend I had an escape hatch. I did not even have a plan. I just liked the feeling of money being somewhere my father could not touch. I thought I was being smart. I did not realize yet that in my family, smart just made you a better target. A couple weeks after the funeral, I tried to talk to my father about finding at least something part-time. Not because I was heartless, but because the math was starting to look like a cliff. He sat at the kitchen table with my mother's old mug between his hands, not drinking, just holding it like a prop. "So that's it," he said softly. "You want me to move on? You want me to replace her?" "That's not what I said," I replied, already hearing how defensive I sounded. I hated that I sounded like I was pleading for permission to be logical. He shook his head like he was disappointed in my character. "Not my words. Your mother would be ashamed. She believed in family, in loyalty." My brother chimed in from the hallway without even looking up from his phone. "Yeah, Tam, you're kind of cold lately." Cold. As if I was the one with free time to sit and mourn. As if I did not spend my bus ride staring out the window, trying not to cry because I could not afford to fall apart in public. So I backed off. That became my survival strategy. Swallow my own panic, keep my voice calm, pay what needed paying, and hope the whole thing would stabilize. At the factory, my supervisor was a woman with a tight ponytail and tired eyes who moved like she was always late. She showed me how to keep the pace and warned me not to get caught looking at my phone. "The line doesn't care if you're having a hard time at home," she said. Not cruel, just honest. "It keeps moving." That sentence became my life. There were nights when I would get home and find the sink full, the living room trashed, my father asleep in the chair with an empty bottle on the floor, and my brother laughing with friends through his headset. I would stand in the doorway and feel this weird heat behind my eyes. Not tears, exactly. More like pressure. Like my skull was too small for everything I was holding in. Sometimes I would go to the bathroom, turn on the fan, and breathe in that humming sound so I could pretend it was normal to cry silently over a toilet while your family enjoyed the peace you paid for. And still, when the rent was due, my father would tap his fingers on the counter and say, "You have it, right?" As if I was the one who might forget. As if I was unreliable. I kept thinking, once the grief fades, he'll see me. He'll appreciate it. My brother will grow up. We'll get through this. It's embarrassing now. How much hope I had for people who never even asked if I was okay. Over the next couple years, the emergencies started coming in waves. Like the universe had put us on some kind of subscription plan for disaster. The first wave was money, pure and simple. There would be a bill that I thought was paid, and then I'd find a red notice tucked under the salt shaker. The gas company, the water, the landlord suddenly needing a late fee because the payment was 2 days behind. Every time I asked my father for details, he'd act personally attacked. One time he slapped the counter and said, "Do you think I'm stealing from you?" With that wounded voice that made me feel guilty for even having eyes. My brother loved those moments. He'd lean against the doorway like a spectator at a show and say, "Wow, you really don't trust your own dad. That's messed up." So I started paying things directly whenever I could. Online when possible. In person when I had to. It was faster, and it stopped the panic. And because my father hated being disrespected, I started doing it quietly. Like I was having an affair with responsibility. The second wave was reputation, and it came from my brother. He borrowed a friend's car, wrecked it behind a grocery store, and showed up at home with a bruised forehead and a brand new attitude. He told me very casually that if I did not pay the repair costs, he'd tell everyone I was controlling the family's money and abusing them. He said it with a shrug, like it was a normal negotiation tactic. I remember my hands shaking as I counted out cash, because I could already imagine the whispers. People in our town did not ask questions. They just picked a villain and fed on it. After that, I stopped telling coworkers anything personal. If someone asked why I looked exhausted, I'd say I had insomnia. If someone asked about my family, I'd smile and say they were fine. I got really good at lying without technically lying. The third wave was emotional manipulation dressed up as health. My father started claiming he had heart problems. Not the kind that required going to a doctor, of course. The kind that required expensive supplements he saw on television. He would hold his chest dramatically, then glance at me like he was checking if I felt bad enough yet. The receipts never made sense. The prices changed every week. Sometimes I found empty bottles in the trash that did not match what he claimed he bought. When I asked, he got offended. "So I'm making it up now? Is that what you're saying?" And then he'd bring my mother into it. Like she was a referee in the room. "Your mother trusted me," he'd say. "She would be disgusted by you." The fourth wave was privacy. That little credit union account I had opened, the one that made me feel like I still had a future, I got it up to a couple $1,000s over time, which felt huge to me. Like I had built a tiny lifeboat plank by plank. My father found out because he started going through the trash. He called it cleaning, but he was really hunting. He discovered an envelope, then stood in the hallway crying with this real, ugly face I had not seen since my mother died. For a second, I thought he was genuinely hurt that I had hidden money. Then the tears stopped like someone flipped a switch. He demanded I use it for a roof repair he insisted was urgent. When I hesitated, he slammed his palm against the wall and shouted that I was betraying him the way people betray widowers, that I wanted him to suffer, that I was killing him, like my mother's accident did. I stood there feeling dizzy, because what do you even say to that? There is no logical reply to someone accusing you of murder because you want to save $2,000. I gave in. I watched my savings evaporate into a half-finished repair. The roof still leaked, just in a slightly different spot. My father blamed bad contractors, and my brother blamed the economy. Nobody blamed the part where they treated my work like a community resource. At work, my hands started cramping. I kept a bottle of cheap pain reliever in my locker. I took it like candy. One day I broke down in the bathroom, sitting on the closed lid of a toilet, trying to cry silently while the fluorescent lights buzzed above me. I remember staring at the chipped tile and thinking, I cannot do this forever. Then I clocked back in and kept moving. Over the years, my father got really good at changing masks. 1 hour, he'd be soft and broken, asking me to sit with him and look at old photos, and I'd fall for it because I missed my mother so much it hurt in my teeth. The next hour, if I mentioned money, he'd get mean. Not screaming mean at first. Quiet mean. Like he was talking to a stranger he was disappointed in. He also started keeping score in a way that made me feel like I owed him for existing. I raised you, he'd say whenever I pushed back. I put a roof over your head. As if he did not spend most days in a chair while I kept that roof from getting repossessed by reality. My brother was worse because he enjoyed it. He would post little jokes on a social media app about girls who think they're better because they work, and everyone in town seemed to understand who he meant. Once he took a photo of me asleep on the couch in my stained work shirt, my hair stuck to my face, and he captioned it with something about how women like me were born tired. People laughed. People I went to school with laughed. I confronted him, and he raised his eyebrows. It's just a joke, he said. You're too sensitive. I wanted to throw his phone out the window. Instead, I did what I always did. Swallowed it, cleaned up, went to work. There was also the church angle, which I did not see coming. My father started going again, not because he found comfort, but because it gave him an audience. He liked being the tragic widower. He liked people bringing casseroles. He liked the way they looked at me like I was the brave daughter holding everyone together. And he used that too. If I refused anything, he'd say, "Do you want them to know what you're really like?" Then he'd tilt his head like he was studying me. People think you're good. Don't embarrass me. So I kept paying. I kept smiling at older women in the church lobby. I kept pretending my brother wasn't acting like my paycheck was his inheritance. I started getting this habit where I'd check my bank account in the middle of the night, just to see the numbers and make sure the world hadn't collapsed while I slept. If the balance looked low, my heart would race. If it looked okay, I'd still feel sick, because I knew okay never lasted. That's what living with them did to me. It made peace feel suspicious. By the time I was 28, 8 years after my mother died, I had stopped hoping my father would recover into a different person. I had stopped hoping my brother would magically become decent. Hope, in that house, was just another expense I could not afford. Still, I kept trying to save. Still, I kept thinking there had to be a way out. I just did not know that the first real crack in the whole system would come from my brother trying to impress someone else. Around that same time, my brother decided he was finally done with our sad little life. He said it like he was announcing a bold business move, not abandoning the 2 people who had been feeding him. He met a woman on a dating app, and suddenly he was a different person. He started wearing nicer clothes. He started talking about networking. He started saying phrases like mindset and leveling up, even though he still asked me for gas money. He told me he was moving into an apartment with her. Not a cheap one, either. Something he definitely could not afford unless the universe was secretly paying him in confidence. When he announced it, my father acted proud. Like my brother's impulsive lease was a graduation ceremony. He needs to live, my father said, and then looked at me in a way that made my stomach tighten. You understand that, right? I nodded because I was tired. Also because arguing in that house felt like punching fog. My brother made a huge show of packing. He posted pictures of boxes, of empty shelves, of his keyring, like he was starring in a documentary called Man Escapes Responsibility. He took photos and angles that made the apartment look fancy and implied success. I knew it was an illusion, because I had been the one paying our reality bills for years. But I still felt a sting seeing him play rich while I was scraping. For a brief moment, I thought, this might actually help me. One less mouth, one less person treating me like a vending machine. Maybe my father will calm down without my brother feeding him that entitled energy. I was wrong. The day after my brother moved out, my father started hovering. He would stand in the kitchen while I cooked, asking what time I'd be home tomorrow, what my shift schedule was, whether I could pick up something from the store. He started saying things like, "It's just me now," in this heavy voice, like he was handing me a burden I did not agree to carry. He demanded new clothes because, according to him, a widower deserved dignity at church. He wanted nicer shoes. He wanted a haircut from a place that was suddenly more respectable. And every time I hesitated, he said, "Your brother isn't here anymore. You can't just let me fall apart." As if my brother leaving was something that happened to him, not something he allowed. I'd tried saving once years earlier, and he found it. After my brother moved out, I tried again. New account, new hiding spot, same result. I opened another account and did not tell anyone. I hid the little card in my sock drawer under old factory uniforms. I felt ridiculous, like a teenager hiding contraband, except my contraband was the idea of a future. 3 weeks later, my father found the card. He did not find it because he accidentally saw it. He found it because he went through my room while I was at work. He sat on my bed when I came home, holding it between his fingers like a piece of evidence. He stared at me with this devastated expression, and for a second I almost apologized. That's how trained I was. Then his face hardened. "So you're planning to leave me," he said. "I'm planning to have savings," I replied, and my voice shook. "That's not the same thing." He stood up so fast the bed creaked. "Don't argue with me," he snapped. "Don't disrespect me in my own house." I almost laughed. In his own house. The house I paid for. The house he treated like a stage for his suffering. He demanded I close the account and use the money to fix the fence and the gate. "People talk," he said. "Do you want them thinking we're trash?" So I paid for a fence repair that got started and then abandoned. For weeks, there were boards leaning against the side of the house like we were living inside a mistake. The gate still stuck. The fence still looked sad. My father blamed the workers. My brother texted laughing emojis about how I was playing homeowner. I started getting headaches that lasted for days. My stomach was always tight. I'd drive to work in my old car with my jaw clenched so hard I'd get home and realize my teeth hurt. And the worst part was that I could feel myself changing. I was getting sharper, meaner in my thoughts, less patient. I snapped at coworkers. I snapped at the cashier at the grocery store one time and then cried in my car afterward because I had become the kind of person I hated. I kept thinking, if I could just get a break, I would be myself again. But breaks did not exist in my family. Breaks were something other people got. My brother, meanwhile, was busy pretending he had made it. And I did not know yet that his pretending was going to come back and demand a down payment from me. At the factory, a coworker I liked, an older woman who always brought leftovers in a plastic container, started watching me the way people watch someone who is about to faint. One night on break, she asked, "Are you eating enough?" I wanted to tell her everything. The bills, the trash hunting, the way my father could turn my mother's memory into a choke chain, the way my brother used the internet like a weapon and then called me sensitive when I bled. Instead, I laughed and said, "Yeah, I just don't sleep." She nodded like she did not believe me. "You can't fix other adults," she said quietly. "You can love them and still let them drown in the pool they jumped into." That sentence made me angry, not at her, at the idea. Because if I let them drown, then what was the point of all the years I already spent keeping them afloat? Yes, I understand that is sunk cost thinking. I also understand I was living it. My father started calling me at work too. Not about emergencies, about feelings. He'd leave voicemails saying he felt so alone. He'd sigh dramatically and mention my mother in that way that made it sound like she was watching and judging. Sometimes he'd end it with, "Call me back, unless you're too busy to care." And I would call back because the guilt was automatic. He trained it into me like a reflex. By the time I hung up, my hands would be shaking and I'd have to go right back to the line and pretend I wasn't unraveling. On my brother's side, the new woman in his life started showing up around town with him. I saw them once at a coffee shop, laughing like they were the only two people with lungs. She looked polished, like she had never worked a shift that left grease in her hair. My brother kept glancing around, checking who saw him. When he noticed me, his smile tightened for half a second. Then he waved like we were friendly strangers. Later, he texted me, "Don't be weird." I stared at that message for a long time. The audacity of him telling me not to be weird, as if I was the one who had turned grief into a freeloading plan. I wanted to type back a whole essay. Instead, I typed, "Okay." That was my default for years. Okay, okay, okay. And every time I said it, some small part of me disappeared. 3 years after my brother moved out, I was 31 by then, on a night when dinner was literally instant noodles because my paycheck had been eaten alive by a surprise fee on our rental. My father got a call that changed the temperature of the whole house. I was standing over the stove, stirring like the noodles had personally offended me, when my father's phone started ringing. He answered in his church voice, soft and solemn. Then his face shifted. His shoulders lifted. His eyes went sharp. I could hear my brother through the phone even from across the room, loud and frantic, talking fast like he was trying to outrun consequences. When my father hung up, he didn't sit down. He turned to me and said, "We have to help him. Not can we. Not should we. Have to. Apparently, my brother and his girlfriend had gotten into one of those rent-to-own situations that sounds like a dream when you are desperate and turns into a trap when you are broke. They were behind by months. The company was threatening to cancel the whole agreement, keep everything they'd already paid, and kick them out with barely any time. My brother wanted the back payments plus extra months up front, plus something he called a security cushion, which I think was his way of saying he wanted money to breathe while still refusing to work. My father's eyes were already accusing me before I even spoke. "You have savings," he said. I felt my throat tighten. "I have nothing," I replied, which was not entirely true. But the little I had saved felt like my last organ. He stepped closer. "This is your brother. And I'm your daughter," I said, and my voice cracked on daughter like it was a weak point. "I've been your daughter the whole time." My father's face went red. "Don't start," he snapped. "This isn't about you." That sentence hit me like a slap, because it was the truth of my entire adulthood. Everything was always not about me. My grief, my exhaustion, my dreams, my body falling apart on a factory line. It was all background noise. But my brother's disaster? Center stage. I said no. Plain, direct no. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just said, "I'm not paying for him to pretend he has a life he can't afford." My father stared at me like he'd never met me. Then he started pacing, his hands flying. He accused me of envy. He accused me of being cold. He accused me of holding grudges like a child. Then he reached for the nuclear button, my mother. He said my mother would be heartbroken to see us fighting over money. He said she taught us family comes first. He said if she were alive, she'd be disgusted with me. He said, "Do you want to kill me too with stress?" I laughed once, a sharp, ugly sound I didn't recognize. "You can't keep doing that," I said. "You can't keep using her like this." His face twisted. "How dare you?" he whispered like I'd committed blasphemy. For 3 days, the house was a war zone. My father didn't speak to me except to slam cabinets. My brother called and left voicemails that swung from fake humble to openly nasty. One message started with, "Hey sis, I know we had our stuff," and ended with, "If you let me lose this place, you're dead to me." On the 4th day, they showed up. My brother and his girlfriend, both dressed like they were auditioning for a struggling but classy photo shoot. My brother's face was tired, but his eyes were still entitled. His girlfriend looked at me like she was evaluating a defective product. My brother hugged my father first, putting on this whole performance about how scared he was. Then he turned to me and said, "We're family." I didn't move. I didn't hug. I just looked at him and thought, "You did not say that when you were posting jokes about me to strangers?" He launched into a speech about blood being more important than pride, about how we were all we had, about how he had made mistakes. But he was trying now. His girlfriend nodded like a supportive witness. My father watched me with this hungry expectation, like he was waiting for me to fold. I didn't. I brought up 2 specific things, because I was tired of vague mistakes. I told my brother I remembered the night he called me a failure who smelled like grease in front of my coworkers. I told him I remembered the photo he posted of me asleep with that caption about women being born tired. His girlfriend's smile flickered for half a second, like she hadn't heard those stories before. That was new. That was interesting. My brother waved his hand. "That was years ago," he said. "We were kids. We were adults," I replied. "You were an adult. You knew what you were doing." My father tried to interrupt. "Enough. This is not the time for old drama." Old drama. Like the way they treated me was just a sitcom plot that ran too long. My brother's girlfriend finally spoke directly to me. "Look," she said, and her voice was sweet, but her eyes weren't. "If you have the ability to help and you choose not to, that says something about you. Something about you. Not about him. Not about them. About me." I felt my face get hot. I wanted to scream. Instead, I took a slow breath and said, "I can help. I'm choosing not to. There's a difference." My brother's jaw tightened, my father's eyes narrowed, and I realized in that moment, this wasn't a request. It was a test. They had decided my role and they were furious I was refusing to audition. I told them no again. My brother's girlfriend looked like she wanted to slap me. My brother muttered something under his breath. My father stood up and said, "You will regret this." I didn't say it out loud, but I thought, I already regret years. One more regret doesn't scare me. What scared me was how calm I felt while saying no, because calm meant something in me had finally stopped caring about their approval. And if I stopped caring, the whole structure collapsed. They left, furious. The door slammed so hard the cheap frame rattled. And a week later, my father sent me a text that said, "Family meeting tonight. No excuses." That's when I knew the real punishment was coming. That week was brutal in a quiet way. My father stopped eating the food I cooked, or he'd eat it and then make a comment like, "Must be nice to have money to waste," even though I literally made noodles and canned sauce. He would sigh loudly when I walked into a room, like my presence changed the oxygen. My brother kept sending messages from different numbers, because apparently boundaries were only for other people. One minute he'd say, "I'm sorry, I'm just scared." And the next he'd say, "Enjoy your lonely little life," as if loneliness wasn't something they had been feeding me for years. I started sleeping with my phone face down because every buzz made my chest jump. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning and stare at the ceiling, imagining my father telling the church ladies I abandoned my brother, imagining coworkers whispering, imagining the landlord getting a sob story call about how I was unreliable. And the sickest part? I was still tempted to pay. Not because I wanted to, but because peace felt like the only thing I had ever been taught to buy. By the time that family meeting text arrived, my hands were already raw from stress. I could almost feel the trap before I walked into it. Still, I went. Because part of me, the part that grew up in that house, believed showing up was the only way to prove I loved them. I didn't understand yet that love was never what they were measuring. When I walked in that night, the living room looked like a courtroom someone set up using only resentment. My father was in his big chair, arms crossed, chin lifted. My brother sat on the couch with his girlfriend beside him, both of them angled toward me like they'd practiced. The girlfriend had her legs crossed and her hands folded in her lap, like she was trying to look calm while silently itching to win. I hovered near the doorway because I suddenly felt like if I sat down, it meant I accepted the role they assigned me. Yes, that's dramatic. No, I didn't care. My father started with a long speech about sacrifice, about how he held the family together after my mother died, about how he never asked for anything except love and unity. He spoke like he was reading from a script, and I realized he had probably rehearsed it in his head with the same intensity he used to rehearse his church prayers. Then he pivoted. He said I had become selfish. He said I had become disrespectful. He said I had been poisoned by the world. My brother nodded along like a bobblehead. My brother added his own version, which was basically a rewrite of history where I was always cold and mean and obsessed with money, and he was the misunderstood dreamer who just needed support. He said I made him feel unsafe in the family. Unsafe. Because I wouldn't pay his rent. His girlfriend jumped in with a comment that made my stomach flip. "Some women," she said, smiling politely, "get addicted to being the martyr. They need to feel needed, but they also need to hold it over everyone's head." I stared at her. "You don't know me," I said. She shrugged. "I'm seeing it." My father watched me, waiting for the reaction he wanted. When I didn't explode, he frowned, like my calm was ruining his scene. Then he delivered the line he'd been saving. He said they'd talked it over, and they'd decided I didn't deserve to be part of the family if I was going to act like this. He said, "You're either with us, or you're against us." My brother leaned forward. "If you don't help, you're not my sister anymore," he said, and there was actual excitement in his voice. Like he liked the idea of cutting me off because it made him feel powerful. My father nodded like a judge. "You heard him," he said. "And frankly, I agree. I will not have someone in this home who refuses to support this family." "In this home?" I laughed. I couldn't help it. It wasn't a big laugh. It was a short, sharp sound, like air escaping a tire. The absurdity finally snapped something in me. "The home I've been paying for," I corrected, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Since I was 20, my father's eyes flashed. "How dare you talk to me like that?" he said. "After everything I've done." "What have you done?" I asked before I could stop myself. That's my flaw. When I get pushed too far, I go straight for the question people can't answer. The room went silent. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. My brother started talking fast to fill the space. "You're so ungrateful," he said. "You think because you have a job you're better than us." "I don't think I'm better," I replied. "I think I'm tired. I think I'm done being treated like an ATM you can insult." My father stood up, and for a second I thought he might actually hit me. He didn't. He did something worse in his mind. He dragged my mother's name into it again. "Your mother would be ashamed," he said, his voice rising. "You're spitting on her memory." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Don't use her," I said. "Not tonight. Not ever again." My brother's girlfriend made a little scoffing sound. My brother rolled his eyes. My father pointed toward the hallway like a man banishing a servant. If you can't be loyal, you can leave, he said. You're not family if you won't act like it. There it was, the disowning, the dramatic line they thought would break me. Instead, I nodded. Okay, I said. It was the same word I'd used for years, but this time it didn't mean surrender. This time it meant done. My father looked surprised, like he expected begging. My brother smirked anyway, like he thought I was bluffing. His girlfriend watched me carefully. I walked to my room and started pulling clothes into a bag. My father followed me, suddenly panicked. Don't be ridiculous, he said. You can't just leave. You just told me to, I replied, and my hands shook as I folded a shirt. You can't throw me out and then be shocked I go. My brother appeared in the doorway, and for the first time his girlfriend looked uncertain. Maybe she hadn't expected consequences to show up in the room. My father tried a different tone, softer, pleading. We didn't mean it like that, he said. We're just trying to make you understand. I looked at him and felt this deep, tired clarity. I understand perfectly, I said. You think my love comes with a price tag. My father's face hardened again. Fine, he snapped because he hated losing. Go. See how far you get without us. Without us. As if they'd been pushing me forward instead of holding on to my ankles. I zipped my bag. I grabbed my phone charger. I grabbed my work shoes. I didn't take anything big because I didn't have the strength for a scene. I didn't want them watching me drag furniture out like a spectacle. On my way out, my brother's girlfriend laughed under her breath. She'll be back, she whispered, loud enough for me to hear. They always come back. I paused at the door and turned around. No, I said, and my voice was quiet. I won't. Then I walked out into the dark, and the air felt like freedom and terror mixed together. I sat in my car with my hands on the steering wheel, breathing like I'd been underwater for years. I didn't have a grand plan. I just had one stubborn thought. I would rather be scared alone than used in a room full of people who called themselves family. I drove to a cheap roadside motel because it was the only place I could think of where nobody would ask me questions. The room smelled like stale cleaner and something fried, and the bedspread looked like it had survived too many strangers. I didn't care. I locked the door, leaned my forehead against it, and let myself shake. I kept checking my phone, half expecting my father to call and scream, half expecting him to call and cry. Nothing came at first, just silence. That silence should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like withdrawal. I lay on the bed with my shoes still on, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. My father's face, my brother's smirk, the girlfriend's laugh, the way they said family like it was a chain they owned. At some point, I started laughing again, quietly, like a person losing it. Because imagine telling someone they're not family and then being shocked when they stop paying your bills. I didn't sleep much. Every time I drifted off, I'd jolt awake thinking I heard a knock. My body was so used to being on alert that it didn't know what to do with a locked door. By morning, my eyes were swollen and my stomach hurt. But the weirdest thing was this small spark of relief. Like even in the panic, something in me was whispering, "You're out." I showered in water that barely got warm, put on my work clothes, and went to my shift like my life wasn't detonating. Because again, the line doesn't care. On my lunch break that day, I sat in my car with a stale granola bar and searched for rooms to rent. I felt like I was doing something illegal, even though the only crime I was committing was choosing myself. I found a small room in an old building 3 blocks from the factory. The listing was plain. No fancy words, no filters. It said quiet, clean, and deposit required. The landlord was an older man who answered the phone like he'd been waiting for someone to disappoint him. When I went to see it after my shift, it was tiny, but it had a window that actually opened and a lock that was mine. The carpet was worn, the walls were a tired off-white, but the place felt like possibility. I signed the simplest agreement of my life. I handed over the deposit with shaking hands. The move happened that weekend. I did it alone because I didn't have people. And because the few coworkers I could have asked didn't deserve to be dragged into my family's mess. I packed my clothes, some books, my basic tools, a couple keepsakes that actually belonged to me, and anything small I'd bought over the years. 2 big bags. A couple boxes. That's it. I left behind a lot. A toaster I paid for, a microwave, a couch, a table. Even though I bought them, they had become part of that house's ecosystem, and I couldn't stand the idea of arguing over a coffee maker while my father screamed about loyalty. Let them keep the objects. I wanted my peace. I moved into the room with a mattress on the floor at first because I couldn't afford everything at once. The first night I lay there listening to the building settle and the distant sound of traffic, and I felt strange. There was no one yelling. No one asking me for money. No one sighing dramatically in the next room. It should have felt like winning. Instead, I felt grief all over again. Not for my mother exactly, for myself. For the version of me that thought love meant endurance. The first week, I kept catching myself waiting for criticism. I would make dinner, simple stuff, nothing fancy, and then flinch because no one was there to say it was too salty, or not enough, or a waste. I'd come home from work and pause before turning the key, bracing for a mess I didn't have to clean. I'd wake up and feel guilty for sleeping in until the sun was up, even though I had worked a shift that would have knocked out a healthier person. I bought a used bed frame and a small television. I bought a lamp with a warm light instead of that harsh overhead glare. I went to a cheap coffee shop twice and sat alone, watching other people talk like their lives weren't full of silent hostage situations. I felt weird spending money on myself, like I was stealing from some invisible family budget. My father didn't contact me for a while, which I think was supposed to be a punishment. He wanted me to feel abandoned, so I'd come crawling back. The problem was, I was finally learning what abandonment actually felt like. It felt like quiet. It felt like a door that locked. It felt like a bank account that didn't get raided by someone else's tantrum. A few weeks in, I started putting money aside again, but this time it was for me. Not for patching someone else's roof. Not for repairing someone else's image. I thought about taking a night course. I thought about getting a better job that didn't chew up my joints. I even thought, in this shaky, daring way, about moving to a bigger city someday. Then, about a month after I left, my father finally called. I saw his name on the screen and my whole body tensed. I almost didn't answer. I did anyway because apparently I needed to confirm he was still exactly who he was. His voice was different. Not sweet. Not pleading. Flat. Cold. He said my brother had lost the apartment. He said my brother and his girlfriend broke up. He said my brother moved back in. He said the utilities at the rental were shut off because nobody could cover it. Then he paused, like he was giving me time to react. I waited. He said, "So what are you going to do?" I actually laughed. Not the sharp laugh from before. A tired laugh. The kind you do when someone tries to hand you a burden you already set down. "I'm going to go to work," I said. His breathing got heavier. "Don't be like this," he warned. "Like what?" I asked. "Like a person who listens?" He started in with the guilt again. He said my mother would never abandon her family. He said I was acting like I hated them. He said I was being cruel. And this time, for the first time, I didn't get dragged under by it. I heard it like a script. The same lines, the same rhythm. He wasn't speaking to me. He was speaking to the role he wanted me to play. "I'm not coming back," I said. "You told me I wasn't family. I'm taking you at your word." He got quiet, and then he did something I didn't expect. He threatened my job. He said he might have to talk to my supervisor and explain how unstable I was. My stomach flipped, but my voice stayed calm. "If you show up at my work," I said, "I'll call security." He went silent like he couldn't believe I'd said that. The old me would have apologized immediately. I didn't. I hung up. Then, because I'm not some fearless hero and I never will be, I sat on my bed and shook for 10 minutes after, staring at my locked door like it was the only thing holding my life together. That night, I blocked his number. It felt both petty and holy. The next morning, I went to work and tried to focus, but my mind kept wandering to the rental house. I pictured my father sitting in the dark, angry, plotting. I pictured my brother pacing, furious that the girlfriend was already gone by then. The moment their shiny apartment dream collapsed, she disappeared back out of state like she'd never existed. My brother blamed her for being heartless, which was almost funny coming from him. I pictured them finally having to face the silence they'd forced me to live in for years, and I hated that part of me still cared. Because caring is my curse. Even when I know better, I still care. But I cared from a distance now. Like watching a storm through a window instead of standing in it. I started doing little things that would have been impossible before. I cooked meals that weren't just survival food. I took walks after dinner. I left my phone in the other room sometimes, just to prove I could. I even looked up low-cost counseling options once, then closed the tab because I got scared of being told I was codependent, like that was a personality flaw instead of a survival response. I also noticed how my body reacted to freedom. My shoulders stopped living up by my ears. I stopped grinding my teeth in my sleep. The headaches got less frequent. It wasn't magic, but it was proof. And that proof made me angrier, because it meant I hadn't been too sensitive or dramatic. I had been trapped. And the moment I stepped out, my nervous system started acting like it remembered how to breathe. I didn't tell anyone at work the details, but people could see something changed. My supervisor asked if I was okay, and I almost said yes like I always did. Instead, I said, "I'm getting there." She nodded like she understood more than I wanted her to. Blocking my father's number didn't end anything. It just forced him to get creative. For weeks, my phone lit up with calls from unknown numbers. Sometimes there were voicemails. Sometimes there were long texts that started with "please" and ended with "you'll regret this." He cycled through every tactic he had: soft remorse, angry blame, my mother's name used like a hammer, fake emergencies. And when I didn't respond, he escalated to the one thing he knew could still scare me: public embarrassment. He showed up at the factory, my factory, the place he already knew I worked because he'd called me there for years, demanding updates, asking for money. I saw him from across the parking lot during shift change, standing near the entrance with his hands in his pockets, like he was just casually there. My stomach dropped so hard I felt nauseous. He spotted me and started walking over with that wounded expression already on his face, like he was practicing tears. I didn't stop. I kept walking toward the building. The security guard, the factory had guards because of the equipment and liability, stepped in front of him before he could reach me. And I heard my father's voice rising in that outraged way. I wanted to melt into the concrete. I got inside and went straight to my supervisor, my hands shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of her desk. I told her my father was outside and I didn't want him there. I expected her to look annoyed. She didn't. She looked tired. "Okay," she said. "We'll handle it." And they did. They told him to leave. He refused at first, then left when he realized he wasn't going to get a scene with me. I didn't go outside until my shift was over and the sun was already low. That night, I got a call from a woman who used to live near us, someone I'd known since I was a kid. She didn't even say hello properly. She said, "Is it true you abandoned your father?" I felt my cheeks burn. "No," I said. "It's not like that." She sighed dramatically, like she was disappointed in me. "He's been telling people you left them with nothing, that he's sick, that your brother is trying, that you're, selfish." I almost laughed because of course he'd picked the one word that hit hardest. Selfish. The thing I'd been trained to fear like a moral disease. I wanted to explain everything: the bills, the trash, the threats, the staged meeting. But I could hear in her voice that she didn't want details. She wanted a simple story with a villain and a victim. That's what people prefer. It makes their world feel organized. So I just said, "I'm not discussing it." She hung up on me like I'd confessed to a crime. For a couple days after that, I couldn't breathe properly. I kept imagining my father in church, shaking his head sadly while people clucked their tongues. I imagined them picturing me as some cold daughter who left her poor, grieving father. I imagined them using my name as a warning to their own kids, and I hated that I still cared. I hated that their opinions could still reach me, even with distance. Meanwhile, the actual consequences kept moving, whether anyone approved or not. The eviction process on the rental house didn't happen overnight, but it wasn't some complicated legal drama either. Over the next couple weeks, I heard scraps through a coworker whose cousin lived in the same neighborhood and loved gossip like it was currency. First, notices started showing up taped to the door. Red paper. Official language. The landlord had run out of patience. My father, from what I heard, ignored them completely. Like if he didn't acknowledge reality, it would politely go away. My brother apparently tried calling the landlord to work something out, promising future payments with nothing to back it up. The deadline came. They didn't pay. The landlord filed. There was a hearing at some point. I only know because my coworker's cousin apparently saw my brother show up late, looking flustered, trying to argue about fairness and bad timing. My father didn't show. He told people, through whatever channels gossip travels, that he couldn't handle the stress. The judge, from what I was told, was polite but unmoved. The landlord had the paperwork. The math was simple. They got a move-out deadline and ignored that too, right up until the sheriff showed up. My father tried to get help from distant relatives, the kind who send holiday cards but don't show up when you're drowning. Some of them sent small amounts of money. Some of them lectured him. Nobody moved in to save him, because nobody wanted to take on what I'd been carrying. The church tried, at first. A food bag here, a small emergency fund there. But even the people who love helping eventually get tired when the person they're helping refuses to change anything. Apparently, the church leader told my father something like, "We can support you, but we can't enable you." My father didn't like that. He called them ungrateful. Yes, he really said that. The irony is almost art. My brother tried to reach out to me once, too, through a new number. He wrote, "You happy now?" I stared at it for a long time. Then I wrote back, "I'm tired." And I blocked that number too. The day they were supposed to move out, I had this moment where my body reacted before my brain did. I found myself on the bus heading toward the old neighborhood, my hands sweating, my heart racing, like some part of me still believed it was my job to show up and fix it. I got off 3 stops early. I stood on the sidewalk in the cold air and felt my legs wobble. I thought about walking the rest of the way. I thought about the smell of that house, the sighs, the accusations, the way my brother looked at me like I existed to serve him. Then I turned around and took the next bus back. I went home to my little room. I made myself dinner. I watched some mindless show on my small television. I tried to breathe like a normal person, but I couldn't stop imagining them, carrying boxes, angry and shocked that the world didn't pause for their feelings. A part of me felt sad. A bigger part of me felt something I didn't want to name yet. Relief. And under the relief, a hard little seed of something darker. Because there's only so long you can be used before you start wanting the people who used you to finally feel it too. After the factory incident, I started parking in a different spot. I started checking my mirrors too much. I started scanning faces in the parking lot like my father was going to appear behind every car. It was exhausting, because I had left the house, but I hadn't left the conditioning. One afternoon, my supervisor pulled me aside and said, "If anyone comes here looking for you, you tell security. You don't owe them a conversation." I wanted to hug her. I didn't, because I'm awkward. I just nodded and said, "Thank you," like it was a normal thing for a boss to protect you from your own parent. It shouldn't be normal, but here we are. I also started noticing something. The people who mattered didn't judge me. The ones who jumped to shame me were always the ones who loved simple stories and hated discomfort. That helped. Not enough to erase the anxiety, but enough to keep me from running back out of guilt. I kept reminding myself, if they wanted me, they wouldn't have expelled me like I was disposable. They didn't want me. They wanted my labor. I didn't plan to see them again. I told myself I was done, and most days I believed it. Then, on a Saturday morning a few weeks later, I got a voicemail from that same coworker. Her voice was careful, like she was breaking bad news. She said she'd heard through her cousin that my father and brother had ended up at the municipal shelter on Grafton Street, the one in the rougher neighborhood near the old textile mill. I listened to the message twice, my stomach tight, and then I sat with it for an hour. I told myself I didn't need to go. I told myself closure was a myth people sold to justify bad decisions. But that pressure in my chest wouldn't leave. It wasn't love, exactly. It wasn't even guilt. It was more like my brain had finally gotten quiet enough to ask for an ending, and my body had agreed. So I got on 2 buses and rode across town to the shelter, in a building that used to be something else before it became a place for people who ran out of options. The air inside smelled like old coffee, bleach, and tiredness. The waiting area was filled with families and single men and women with plastic bags, all of them wearing that same expression of, "I used to have a plan." I almost turned around, because walking in felt like stepping into a nightmare I used to live. Then I saw them. My father and my brother were sitting at a table in the common room. They looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. Their clothes were clean but clearly donated, the kind of random mix that happens when you don't choose your own image. My brother's hair was unkempt. My father's posture was slumped. For a moment, I felt this sharp twist of something like pity. My father spotted me first. His face lit up with relief so fast it almost made me sick. He stood and started walking toward me like he expected a hug. "There you are," he said, and his voice had this forced warmth like he was trying to skip over everything. My brother stood too, and his eyes widened. He looked embarrassed, then angry, then hopeful. The emotions flickered across his face like he didn't know which one would get him what he wanted. My father reached for my arm, and I stepped back. His hand hung in the air awkwardly, and I saw irritation flash behind his eyes. The old entitlement was still there, just wearing thinner clothes. "I came to talk," I said. My voice sounded calm. My stomach did not feel calm. My hands were cold. My father nodded quickly. "Good," he said. "Good. We need to figure out what you're going to do." There it was again. What I was going to do. Like I was the emergency contact for their lives. I took a breath. "No," I said. "That's why I'm here. I'm not doing anything. I'm here to end this." My brother scoffed. "End what?" he asked, trying to act tough, but his voice cracked at the end. I looked at him. "The cycle," I said. "The part where you two treat me like a wallet and then act shocked when I stop opening." My father's face tightened. "You're being dramatic," he said automatically, like it was his favorite label. I didn't take the bait. I didn't list every bill, every insult, every sleepless night. I didn't need to. They knew. They just wanted me to doubt myself. So I kept it simple. I told them they'd spent years draining me, humiliating me, and making me feel like my only value was what I could produce. I told them they disowned me the moment I refused their last demand. I told them I was finally sleeping without fear, finally saving for my own future, finally feeling like a person. My father tried to interrupt, but I kept going. "You don't get to rewrite it," I said. "You don't get to act like you're victims of my cruelty. You made choices. You made them over and over." My brother's eyes got wet. I didn't expect that. He rubbed his face hard like he was angry at his own tears. "I messed up," he said, and his voice went small. "I know I did." That hit me in a weird place, because I had wanted an apology for so long that hearing it now felt like someone handing me a gift after they set my house on fire. Like, thanks, but what am I supposed to do with this? "I'm not here for a confession," I said. "I'm here for boundaries." My father's expression shifted into a desperate plea. "We're your family," he said, and for the first time in a long time, the sadness in his face looked real. "You can't just leave us like this." I stared at him and felt that cold clarity again. "You left me first," I said quietly. "You left me every day you chose not to work. You left me every time you let him mock me. You left me when you told me I wasn't family." My father opened his mouth, closed it, then tried the old authority tone. "You owe me respect," he said, like he could still summon the past. In that room, surrounded by people who were also surviving consequences, it didn't land. He sounded ridiculous, and I think he knew it, because his shoulders sagged. I said I was not going to give them money. I said I was not going to move them in with me. I said I was not going to be contacted through my work, my neighbors, or random numbers. I said if they showed up again, I would call for help. Not because I wanted drama, but because I needed safety. My brother whispered, "So that's it?" And he sounded angry and scared. "That's it," I confirmed. My father stepped toward me again, and for a second his hand reached out like he wanted to grab my arm and pull me back into my old role. I saw that impulse, and my whole body went rigid. I stepped back, firm, not violent, just solid. "Don't," I said. He stopped. We stood there in silence, and I realized something. I was not afraid of him anymore. I was afraid of the version of me that used to fold, the version that would have apologized for hurting their feelings while they were crushing my life. I didn't fold. I turned and walked out. My legs felt shaky, but each step away from them felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself. Outside, the air was cold and bright. I sat on the bus stop bench and breathed, and my hands stopped trembling. After that, I kept my promise. I didn't answer unknown numbers. I didn't reply to messages sent through other people. I didn't go back to the church. I let them tell whatever story they wanted. If someone asked me, I said, "I'm not discussing it," and changed the subject. They tried reaching out twice more over the next month, once through a church member who meant well but didn't understand, and once through my brother using someone else's phone. Both times I held firm. After that, the calls stopped. I took a night class through a community program. Nothing glamorous, just something practical that could get me off the line eventually. I saved little by little. I bought a slightly better used car when mine finally started making a noise that sounded like surrender. I made a small home in that old building, with warm light and meals that didn't taste like panic. Sometimes late at night, I'd still feel that old tug of guilt. I'd picture my mother, and my throat would tighten. But then I'd picture the way my father used her name like a weapon. I'd picture my brother laughing at me online. I'd picture that staged living room meeting. And the guilt would turn into something else. Not revenge like movie revenge. Not some dramatic plot. Just a quiet refusal. Because the best thing I ever did to them was stop being available. I don't know for sure what happened to them long term. I only heard scraps. The kind of gossip that filters through a small town like smoke. Half truth, half speculation. Someone said my brother ended up getting a warehouse job that paid barely enough to keep him afloat. Someone else mentioned my father bouncing between temporary housing situations, still complaining to anyone who would listen. Maybe they changed, maybe they didn't. That part isn't mine anymore. What's mine is the fact that I sleep now. I eat. I laugh sometimes, real laughter, not the sharp kind that comes from disbelief. I make plans that don't include rescuing adults who don't want to be saved. And when people ask if I miss them, I tell the truth. I miss the idea of family. I don't miss the one I had.